Nature must have had fly fishing in mind when creating the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Down through the ages, the forces of wind and water and the hands of time sculpted the land that would become the state of Colorado into an angler's paradise. A land overflowing with lively streams and sparkling lakes, where fly fishers from around the globe would come to cast their lines against the backdrop of spectacular mountain scenery. From thousands of trout-filled lakes resting near timberline, to remote stretches of wilderness streams laced with beaver ponds, to middle elevation creeks and streams that feed the mighty rivers that flow to the oceans, and to the mountain reservoirs where trout grow huge. There is something here for all anglers. Over millions of years, 3 species of cutthroat trout evolved in Colorado. Descendants of these ancient fish still inhabit these waters today. Sparkling like living jewels, these colorful native trout adorn the icy waters of streams and alpine lakes along both sides of the Continental Divide. Here in the high country, adventurous anglers are free to explore the vast tracts of wilderness in pursuit of the wild cutthroats. Another Colorado native, the mountain whitefish, adds its own style of high-energy angling to the cold-water mix. Deeply bent rods are the trademark of these muscular fish. In addition to the natives, Colorado's cold water fisheries are resplendent with trout species that were introduced in the 1800s. Brook trout from the eastern United States and brown trout from Europe adapted quickly to the favorable habitat, and they exist today in thriving self-sustaining populations. They may not be true natives, but the browns and the brookies are wild in every sense of the word. They provide fly fishers with splendid angling opportunities in hundreds of miles of backcountry waters. High-leaping rainbow trout from the Pacific Northwest and colorful Snake River cutthroats are found in drainages throughout Colorado. These popular species are spawned in state-operated hatcheries and stocked as fingerlings, which grow up as wild fish. Sleek frontline predators such as the razor-toothed northern pike prowl the weeds at mountain reservoirs. Wipers, high-bred bass, voracious and powerful speed demons that patrol the waters of the Front Range and Eastern Plains. No matter where your adventures may lead you, the Colorado Division of Wildlife hopes this calendar of year-round fly fishing events will enrich your Colorado angling experience. March can be a puzzling time of year for Colorado fly fishers. While the calendar says that spring has arrived, the weather usually says otherwise. Yet while winter hangs on in the high country, down below there are hints of things to come. In March, fly fishing opportunities expand as winter loosens its icy grip on rivers and major tributaries at lower elevations. March is a time of lingering hatches of winter midges, and the first appearance of the year of the blue-winged olive mayflies. March also stirs the spawning instincts of rainbow trout, pulling them out of their winter retreats to make runs up several major rivers. Fly fishers yearning for pre-spring action might give the Roaring Fork Valley a try. The action stretches up the valley from Glenwood Springs to Basalt, but you don't have to look any farther than Carbondale and the Crystal River. Start your day on the Crystal just up from the confluence of the Roaring Fork, a short walk from town.
A basic fly selection for late winter nymphing in rivers like the Crystal and the Roaring Fork might include a flashback pheasant tail, a beadhead prince nymph, a zebra midge, and a San Juan worm. The Crystal is a small river where in late winter the water runs low and clear. Here the basic technique is up and across nymphing. The angler makes short to medium long casts, dropping a pair of weighted nymphs into the fast water above deeper runs and into small pools. Weighted flies landing in the faster currents are less likely to spook the trout that are holding in the calmer water below. The Crystal holds good numbers of brown trout and rainbow trout, as well as a very strong population of mountain whitefish. Over on the Roaring Fork, similar action is taking place, but with one new twist. It is the year's earliest hatches of blue-winged olive mayflies, which means that the nymphs below are really coming to life. The hatches will grow in intensity in coming weeks, but for now the trout show little interest in feeding on the adults. As the nymphs grow more active, so do the trout. Fishing action picks up as more forage is now drifting in the currents. Rainbow trout also become more active as they feel the urge to spawn.
Big ball, really nice rainbow. Ah!
Even on days when the action is slow, anglers on the Roaring Fork can always count on the venerable whitefish to put a bend in their rod.
There's a fish.
The Roaring Fork is well known for its trophy class whitefish.
Other rivers where anglers may find late winter action include the White River, the lower reaches of the Arkansas, the Middle Colorado, the Frying Pan, and the lower Poudre River.
March also means the beginning of rainbow trout spawning activity in many rivers and streams. While most rainbow trout are spawned in hatcheries, remnant populations of wild Colorado River rainbow trout and other rainbows that were introduced by the Division of Wildlife attempt to reproduce on their own. One such population lives in 11 Mile Reservoir and makes a spawning run up the South Platte River into the stretch known as the Dream Stream.
Your fly selection for fishing over spawning rainbow trout should include both nymphs and dry flies. You will need a selection of size 18 to 22 nymphs, such as a Mercury Black Beauty, a Top Secret Midge, a Nuclear Egg, and a San Juan Worm. Also be ready with dry flies to imitate emerging blue-winged olives and midges, RS2s, and Parachute Adams in sizes 18 to 24 will cover most of the hatches.
That's a beautiful little rainbow. He ate the little midge. This guy's gonna take me all the way to 11 Mile Reservoir. It's a beautiful cut bow, 15-inch. Not a mark on this fish, just an absolutely beautiful Spinny Mountain Ranch rainbow cut bow.
The technique here is a combination of sight fishing for active fish when possible,
Right there, see him sweeping? That guy is just munching. Holy mackerel.
and blind fishing the deeper runs. Strike indicators are great tools for detecting subtle strikes of unseen fish when dredging nymphs through deep water. But when sight fishing to a visible fish, the strike indicator may be used for keeping track of the nymph's exact location. Veteran nymph fishers focus their attention on the fish, setting the hook if the fish opens its mouth or swings out to feed when the nymphs are in its strike zone. Set the strike indicator at a depth that is about twice the depth of the water. Don't be surprised by a sudden hatch and the appearance of rising fish. A well-timed presentation to a rising trout could result in your first trout on a dry fly for the year.
Nice little fish on a dry.
Other locations where you may find rainbow spawning action include the confluence of the Colorado and the Roaring Fork at Glenwood Springs, the Gunnison River in Gunnison Gorge, and the Williams Fork River at the confluence of the Colorado River.
The month of April is the prime time for fly fishers to spring into action. Longer days and periods of fair weather open windows of opportunity for winter-weary dry fly and stillwater aficionados. Dry fly fishing highlights for April include the year's first significant hatches of blue-winged olive mayflies on rivers throughout the mountains. Down on the Arkansas River, you can hear the early rumblings of the mighty Mother's Day caddis hatch. April is also the time of the big thaw at Mountain Park reservoirs and the highly anticipated annual opening of one very special gold medal fishery. From Colorado Springs, Highway 24 heads up and over to South Park. In the pre-dawn hours of a cold night in mid-April, anglers that have traveled from far and near are lined up in front of the closed gates at Spinney Mountain Reservoir. The early birds have been here for hours, arriving the evening before and spending the night in their vehicles. Being here and being a part of the opening day scramble at Spinney Mountain Reservoir has become a tradition among scores of stillwater anglers. For them, a few discomforts are easy to justify when you examine the reasoning behind the madness. Spinney Mountain Reservoir is Colorado's only gold medal fishery that has an annual opening day. Its fertile waters are famous for producing huge trout, which, by the way, have not seen a fly or a lure since the reservoir closed in November. These anglers are driven by visions of waters teeming with big dumb trout that will hit anything that moves, or so the theory goes. Aside from the opening scramble to be the first to cast a lure into the virgin waters, there exists a sense of toleration among fellow anglers on opening day. Fishing in a crowd isn't so bad if the fish are biting.
A well-stocked fly box for ice-out conditions at Mountain Park reservoirs should include a selection of size 12 to 16 weighted olive scuds and halfback nymphs, and midge patterns such as rainbow warriors and mercury brassies in sizes 18 and 20, and a variety of woolly buggers, clouser minnows, and egg patterns such as a nuclear egg and a flashtail hot egg. Fishing tactics vary among fly fishers, but wading the shoreline and stripping streamers over shallow water probably accounts for more than its share of large trout. A close second would be fishing a scud or other nymph pattern near the shore. Scuds are a year-round staple in the trout's diet, and trout will seldom pass up an easy meal. Fish scud patterns near the bottom using short, quick strips. Still fishing an egg pattern or a midge larva beneath a strike indicator also accounts for its share of hookups. After ice out, trout usually cruise the warmer water in the shallows in search of food.
Other reservoirs for similar ice-out action include the Delaney Butte Reservoirs, Lake John, Antero Reservoir, Tarryall Reservoir, and Honholz Reservoir.
It's the beginning of the third week of April, and a few caddis are beginning to pop on the Arkansas River above Canyon City. The emerging caddis are bringing a few trout to the surface, but the bulk of the action is taking place below. Cliff swallows are also taking part in the action. The swallows have returned to the river from points south. Their arrival conveniently coincides with the caddis hatch. The acrobatic birds swoop and dive, plucking the adult caddis from the air above the river.
When selecting flies to cover all phases of any caddis hatch, anglers should not overlook the time-tested dry fly patterns such as an olive elk hair caddis, a black foam caddis, and an egg-laying caddis in sizes 16 to 18. Wet fly patterns to imitate nymphs and emergers should include a brown hackle peacock, a soft hackle sparkle pupa, and a beadhead soft hackle. As the hatch progresses upstream, dry fly activity usually centers around the leading edge of the hatch and rising trout. Here a dry fly is cast up and across. The fly is drifted through areas of rising fish and then skittered on the surface downstream at the end of the drift. Skittering imitates the egg-laying female caddis that bounce up and down on the surface as they deposit their eggs. Perhaps the most productive of all tactics involves dead drifting a pair of weighted pupa patterns along the bottom. Midway through the drift, the rod is lifted up. This sends the nymphs swinging toward the surface like an emerging caddis.
For more early caddis action, look to these rivers: the Roaring Fork, the Laramie, the Lake Fork of the Gunnison, and the Conejos.
South Platte River near the town of Deckers is a tailwater fishery where fishing pressure can be heavy from Denver area anglers. The trout are known to be highly selective. April also sees the return of some of the heaviest Baetis mayfly hatches of the year. Commonly known as blue-winged olives, or BWOs, these elegant little mayflies are widespread, occurring in rivers and streams throughout the state.
Anglers fishing a blue-winged olive hatch on the South Platte might see Rem Chung of Denver, the man who invented the famous Rem Simulator 2, better known as the RS2, the fly that helped spawn the technical age of tailwater nymphing. Rem designed the RS2 for the highly selective trout in the South Platte River, but the simple little pattern has found a place in fly boxes the world over. Although most anglers know the RS2 as a BWO emerger, Rem Chung reveals that he didn't have BWOs in mind when he created the pattern.
Now, actually, it is to simply suggest something that's insect-like in the water, and it can be actually used even during the caddisfly hatches. Overall, it is the kind of a movement that would be able to create while it's being drifted that would be suggestive of something that's alive and therefore edible. That's how it is, I believe.
Colorado streams with blue-winged olive hatches are too numerous to mention, but here are a few major rivers with reliable hatches: Roaring Fork River, Arkansas River, Gunnison Gorge, Animas River, and the Frying Pan.
May is a time when fly fishers will find good fly fishing awaiting them in all directions. The Mother's Day caddis hatch is marching up the Arkansas, and ponds and reservoirs at lower elevations show previews of summer, offering anglers a shot at largemouth bass and sunfish. In May, the stage is set for explosive action at Front Range and Eastern Plains reservoirs as marauding bands of wipers patrol the shallows in search of gizzard shad. May could also be known as the month of May B when it comes to trout fishing at free-flowing rivers and streams. Late May usually marks the beginning of the spring runoff. The runoff means swollen, roily rivers and very difficult fishing conditions. While some streams are temporarily out of commission, others are primed for action. One hotspot in May is centered around the town of Almont. On the East River, stonefly nymphs are on the menu and trout are on the feed.
To match the small brown and yellow stonefly nymphs, you should have a selection of size 6 to 10 fly patterns such as a beadhead prince, a 20-incher, an ugly bug, a golden tungstone flashback, and a conehead woolly bugger. Before runoff, fly fishers can take advantage of the small brown and yellow stonefly nymphs as they become active and begin crawling toward shallow water. Trout lie at the edges of runs and seams, waiting to pick off any of the nymphs that are swept into the current. One strategy is to dead drift the nymph through the holding water and then let the fly swing in toward the bank. Another tactic is to cast the fly close to the bank and let the current sweep it away.
Beautiful East River rainbow. This is a woolly booger with a cone on the head to help it sink down and give it a little jig through the water.
If the flows are right, drifting and fishing stonefly nymphs on the Upper Gunnison can be a day to remember.
Another one on the dropper fly. Where are you, feller? Nice brown. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Boy, that's heavy. Nice Gunnison River brown trout. There you go, buddy.
The basic technique for fishing stonefly nymphs from a drift boat is called slap and drag, where a heavily weighted fly is slapped down within inches of the bank and then dragged away quickly.
This is where that roll cast really comes in helpful. You can just work it off the bank, take it right into your next cast. You don't have to false cast. Flies spend way more time on the water than they do in the air. With that roll cast with the sidearm, you can kind of work them in under some of these smaller willows, some of these overhanging branches. So it really is a benefit to get them in tight to the banks, especially at this high water, where those fish are holding tight to the banks, but it's a tough, difficult cast. Little guy, but a fish is a fish. Nice, there we go, there's one.
Look for pre-runoff stonefly nymphing action on most well-oxygenated streams, including the Taylor River, the Upper Gunnison, the Rio Grande, the Poudre, and the Gunnison Gorge.
By mid-May, the Mother's Day caddis hatch has moved up the Arkansas River to Salida. The scenery has changed, but the flies and techniques for fishing the caddis hatch are the same as they were when the hatch began in April. The hatch will continue until it fades away below Leadville or is smothered by runoff.
The Arkansas is not the only river that boasts a caddis hatch in May. Others include the Conejos River, the Roaring Fork River, and the White River.
Springtime in Colorado brings warm water ponds and reservoirs at lower elevations to life. Fly fishing opportunities for largemouth bass and bluegills are abundant in every corner of the state. The Western Slope and Front Range anglers will find these scrappy fighters willing and ready for action.
The size of the fly, not the size of the fish, determines the size of the fly rod. A 6-weight trout rod is ideal for casting small cork poppers and streamers, but a heavier 8-weight rod is needed for casting the big, wind-resistant deer hair flies and weighted streamers. The line should be a weight-forward floating line to match the rod. Leaders and tippets must be strong and short to turn over heavy flies at the end of the cast and to keep larger bass away from snags. Your bass fly box should contain a few deer hair poppers, damsel flies, pencil poppers, and hopper patterns such as a club sandwich and a Chernobyl ant. Bass flies are just plain fun. Fun to fish with, fun to tie, and fun to look at. Thanks to a bass's curiosity, bass flies come in outrageous colors and shapes. Largemouth bass hunt by ambush, hiding near underwater structure, waiting for dinner to come to them. When hungry, they may be attracted to anything that moves. A largemouth bass takes a yellow and green deer hair fly on the surface, and we assume that the bass thought it was eating a frog. But then why does the bass take the same fly in blue? The beauty in bass fishing is not caring why the bass eats a blue frog or a purple eel, it's just fun watching them do it. When it comes to fast action fishing that is packed with fun, fly fishing for sunfish is hard to beat. In spring, bluegills and other sunfish migrate into the shallows near shore. In coming weeks, they will spawn in open sunny areas. In the meantime, the scrappy bluegills will attack just about anything that ventures into their territory, including flies.
Front Range residents will find a wealth of bass and bluegill locations in Fishing Close to Home, which is available at all Division of Wildlife offices.
For a growing number of savvy fly fishers, May is the time to turn their attention to warm water fisheries like Pueblo Reservoir in pursuit of wipers. Sterile offspring of white bass and striped bass rank among the hardest fighting freshwater game fish in America, due in part to the phenomenon known as hybrid vigor, which means that these predators are stronger and faster and have more stamina than either of their parents. For fly fishers, hybrid vigor translates into jolting strikes and electrifying action on the end of a fly line.
When fly fishing for wipers, be sure and bring enough rod to do the job. An 8 or 9 weight fast action rod is needed to deliver large flies at long distances and to muscle strong fish away from underwater snags. A floating line will do a fair job, but a better choice is a medium density, full sinking line one that sinks about 6 inches per second. Leaders are easily constructed using regular monofilament fishing line. Taper the leader using 5 feet of 17-pound test, then 3 feet of 14-pound test, and a 2-foot piece of 10-pound test for the tippet. No wiper fly box is complete without an assortment of 3-inch long streamers, including Brooks Honey and Platinum Blondes, Clouser Deep Minnows, Lefty's Deceivers, Zonkers, and Chubby Gummies, and topwater flies such as Pencil Poppers and Deer Hair Poppers. Catching wipers by any method is great fun, but catching them on a fly rod is in a league by itself. Long distance casting and dogged battles with a powerful and stubborn fish are all part of a game that reaches a higher plateau when played with fly rods. Wipers' primary forage are gizzard shad, silvery bait fish which travel in schools and seek the warmer water in the shallows. Gizzard shad become frenzied when predators are nearby, but wipers seem to prefer a fast-moving meal. After casting the streamer, point the rod straight towards the fly and start stripping the line with fast snaps about 6 inches long. The faster the better. When a wiper hits a fast-moving fly, it usually overtakes it from behind, grabs it, and then makes a U-turn. This stops the line cold. The strike is telegraphed to your hands like a jolt of electricity. The wiper will set the hook. All you have to do is hang on to the rod. Dawn and dusk are the best times to find wipers chasing shad in coves, on main lake points, and shallow shoals. Wipers also become much more aggressive when there is a light chop on the water.
The Colorado Division of Wildlife plants fingerling wipers in the following Eastern Plains reservoirs: Negranda Reservoir, John Martin Reservoir, North Sterling Reservoir, Trinidad Reservoir, and in many warm water reservoirs on the Front Range.
Thanks for the shower.
June is when the big bugs come out to play. It's a time of plenty for trout and for anglers. Trout can now turn their attention away from the smaller insects that have carried them through the winter. In June, a feast of giant stoneflies is laid before trout in rivers, and in Stillwater, trout receive a smorgasbord of hearty servings including damselflies and jumbo mayflies. One of the most anticipated but possibly the most fickle of all Colorado fly fishing events is the giant salmon fly hatch. The annual emergence of the giant Terra Narcissus stoneflies, whose appearance is often washed out by spring runoff. Mountain reservoirs are heating up with their own annual big bug events. June is the time for the great damselfly and Calbaetis mayfly hatches, large insects that can bring trophy trout to feed at the surface. And if you like your fly fishing with a bit more teeth in it, June is the time to bring out the big rods and stock the weedy shallows for northern pike. June also features the early appearance of the largest of the mayflies, green drakes, jumbo bugs whose nighttime emergence in June drives trout wild. The salmon fly hatch, as fishing legends go, is said to tantalize large trout into slamming big bushy flies on the surface. It stands to reason that a lot of big, tasty morsels drifting along within easy reach must surely get a rise from a large trout. But a problem arises in putting this theory to the test. In most years, by the time the hatch gets underway, so does spring runoff. Longtime Colorado anglers know that keeping track of daily flows is critical to hitting the salmon fly hatch during peak times. Salmon flies inhabit all of the upper and middle Colorado River, but when conditions are right, the public area around the pump house boat ramp can be a center of action.
Flies to cover the salmon fly hatch should include a selection of size 6 to 10 dry flies such as a sulfur pillow, an orange stimulator, and a rubber-legged stimulator. For nymphs, have on hand a few large ugly bugs and 20 inchers. Dry fly action can be hit or miss because salmon flies only spend time on the surface when they are depositing their eggs. The main attraction to trout are the giant stonefly nymphs that are making their way to the edge of the river. Stonefly nymphs crawl out of the water onto rocks and bushes where they transform into adults. When the females return to lay their eggs, they may drift or skitter along on the surface for some distance. Perhaps the most effective technique for covering the hatch is to use a dry dropper setup. Here, a large dry fly performs double duty as both a fly and a strike indicator for a weighted nymph.
Salmon flies are widespread and common to all of Colorado's fast-flowing rivers. In years when spring runoff is late, you may hit the hatch at the North Platte River, the Rio Grande, the Lake Fork of the Gunnison River in Gunnison Gorge, and the Conejos River.
For some fly fishers, there's no finer time of the year than June, and the overlapping hatches of two prominent stillwater insects. Large trout and mountain reservoirs appear to throw caution to the wind when waves of damselfly nymphs are wiggling their way towards shore, and the large Calabatus mayfly nymphs are emerging at the surface. A hot spot for stillwater hatches are the fertile waters of North Park's famous Delaney Butte reservoirs.
Recommended dry fly patterns include the following in size 12 to 14. A Calabatus Quigley, a Calabatus Comparadun, a Parachute Adams, and a damselfly. For wet flies, try a size 10 to 14 olive damselfly nymph, a pheasant tail, and a brown hackle peacock fished as an emerger. In June, damselfly nymphs, which have lived in the deep weeds for a full year, abandon the safety of the substrate to make a treacherous migration to distant shores. On any given morning, thousands of nymphs may rise from the depths to just beneath the surface and begin wiggling toward shore. The enticing undulations of waves of robust insects does not go without notice. Trout cruise beneath migrating insects, picking them off at will. Trout also may position themselves near shore, where they can intercept the nymphs as they climb out of the water to emerge into adults. The technique for fishing the damselfly hatch is simple. Just make your fly look and act like the real thing. With a floating fly line and a long leader, cast the unweighted damselfly nymph straight out from shore and let the fly sink about 12 inches. Retrieve the fly with long, steady strips, pausing between strips to let the fly sink.
He's fighting. Whoa!
Tactics for fishing the Calabatus hatch require a bit more patience than the damselfly hatch. A good practice is to keep moving until you find an area where the large mayflies are seen on the water and trout are rising. The best tactic is to cast a dry fly into an area of rising trout and let it sit there until a fish eats it. On calm days, giving the fly an occasional twitch or retrieving it slowly may induce more strikes. On windy days, emerging Calabatus adults struggle getting off the water, and the Quigley cripple becomes a very effective pattern.
Other reservoirs with excellent hatches of damselflies and Calabatus include Steamboat Lake, Honholz Reservoir, Antero Reservoir, Tarryall Reservoir, and Spinney Mountain Reservoir.
Another stillwater event that steps up excitement at cold water reservoirs in June is the spring awakening of the northern pike. Self-sustaining populations of wild northern pike are found at many of Colorado's weedy mountain reservoirs. Stalking these fearsome predators on foot in the shallow flats with a fly rod can lead to explosive action. Broad expanses of weedy shorelines at 11 Mile Reservoir are prime northern pike hunting grounds for fly rodders. A pike's metabolism slows to near hibernation in winter. As the water warms, the pike wake up, and they wake up hungry.
Fly rods for pike fishing should be heavy and fast, capable of casting large, wind-resistant flies and battling tough fish. You will need an 8, 9, or 10 weight rod loaded with a weight-forward floating line. Pike leaders can be built by tapering sections of monofilament line down to 14-pound test and then adding a tippet of flexible steel leader. Big and bushy is the general rule for pike flies. Few improvements have been made to the standards, such as a black bunny leech, the Clouser deep minnow, the zonker, and a Lefty's deceiver. Most fly fishing for pike is casting blindly, using the fly to search for fish, wading the shallows, broadcasting the area with long casts, moving slowly but steadily, covering a lot of territory. When the conditions are right, the alert angler might be able to spot them hiding in the weeds. Vicious and evil-eyed, northern pike hunt by ambush, lurking in the shadows, coiled, ready to strike.
Yeah, big head shake.
Some pike fisheries stand out above the others. Trophy pike waters in addition to 11 Mile Reservoir include Williams Fork Reservoir, Vallecito Reservoir, Stagecoach Reservoir, and Taylor Park Reservoir.
Another popular June fishing event takes place during late evening and at night on the Roaring Fork River in downtown Glenwood Springs. Overlapping hatches of green drake mayflies, yellow sallies, and caddis drive trout into a feeding frenzy.
The fly selection should include a variety of high-floating dry flies such as a humpy, a green drake, an elk hair caddis, and a stimulator. Drift boat anglers time their trip to arrive at favorite pools, where they will anchor and wait for the action. Wade fishers wait on shore, casting to the occasional rising fish while waiting for the action to pick up. In the glow of city lights, dry fly anglers hook up with feisty trout, one after the other.
He's got 2 fish at once.
Hey,
Nice one.
that's not fair.
While the night hatches are mainly a Roaring Fork phenomenon, other rivers with overlapping multiple hatches include the Conejos River, the White River, the Rio Grande, and the Colorado River. In
July, summer finally arrives in the high country. The stairways are now open to Colorado's expansive attic, the land above the clouds where treasures await the adventurous angler. Treasures in the form of wild and colorful native cutthroat trout and spectacular alpine scenery. Colorado is home to 3 separate species of cutthroats that have graced these rushing waters for millions of years. In recent times, the Colorado Division of Wildlife has established more than 100 recreational populations of native cutthroats for the pure delight of catch and release angling. Since each species is unique to its own particular watershed, anglers may try for the cutthroat triple crown, logging all 3 species in a single summer. Among the many joys of July are overlapping hatches of summer caddis. On any given day during the season, anglers may find caddis popping up on any mountain stream. Tucked away in the headwaters of the Rio Grande watershed are secluded mountain streams and alpine lakes that are the historic home of native Rio Grande cutthroat trout. High in the rugged mountains of the San Juan Wilderness south of Alamosa, Rio Grande cutthroats have been returned to the Rio de los Pinos. Here a family of Rios are a part of a massive restoration project by the Division of Wildlife to restore native trout to their natural habitats. Through this effort, scores of restoration populations have been reintroduced to remote wilderness streams. These special fish are isolated by natural barriers, such as waterfalls. Barriers protect the Rios from interbreeding with non-native species. The hike is long and the going is rough, but determined anglers will discover glorious cutthroat trout existing as they did millions of years ago. Here the angling is reserved for the gentle of spirit. Fishing is restricted to flies and lures only, and all cutthroats must be carefully returned to the water. Other purely recreational populations of Rios have been established in alpine lakes and streams at lower elevations. In the San Luis Valley, north of the town of Del Norte, a population of Rio Grande cutthroats inhabit the waters of Canero Creek. The creek is accessible by vehicle, but the Rios that live there are also protected by special regulations.
A light, 2-weight rod will enhance the experience. Small streams are ideal for attractive dry fly patterns such as royal wolves and humpies, or smaller flies like a parachute Adams or a blue-winged olive. Trout in small streams are usually not picky about the fly pattern, but they are easily spooked. Low approaches and careful upstream casting are good habits to get into. The Rio Grande cutthroats also share the water with brook trout.
A short list of other Rio Grande cutthroat trout waters include Alberta Park Reservoir, Alverjones Lake, Ann Lake, and Willow Creek Lake.
In the eons following the last ice age, populations of Colorado River cutthroats evolved in the Colorado River and its many tributaries, a vast area covering nearly the entire western slope of Colorado.
High country lake, beautiful scenery, decent sized fish. What more could you ask for, huh? Wow, it's a good looking fish, huh? I'm impressed. Strong too, god damn, this thing's strong. Wow, look how fat he is. It's a beauty.
Today, fly fishers can enjoy recreational populations of Colorado River natives that the Divisional Wildlife has restored to the backcountry streams and lakes. In addition to the backcountry, Colorado River cutthroats also swim in Crowshoe Lake, a small lake in Routt National Forest that is accessible by vehicle.
Flies for Crowshoe differ slightly from alpine lakes. An olive scud pattern can be the hottest thing on the menu.
Looks like that could be a 18-inch fish. Yeah, wow, wow. Come on in, big boy. Wow, he's fat. He's obviously been eating some scuds. Okay. Wow, look at that guy. Not bad for a high country lake, huh? Right.
I like it. For those who prefer their cutthroat trout fishing a bit further off the beaten path, the hike to Eggleston Lake on Grand Mesa is well worth the effort. Getting to the Colorado River cutthroats that grace the backcountry waters of the Flat Top Wilderness can be an adventure in itself.
Another popular location for catching Colorado River cutthroat trout is Trappers Lake. Colorado's state fish, the greenback cutthroat trout, evolved in the upper reaches of drainages that flow down the eastern slopes of the state. Once believed to be extinct, greenbacks have made a remarkable comeback after many years of recovery efforts by the Division of Wildlife. Recreational populations of greenbacks await the adventurous angler at alpine lakes found throughout the South Platte and Arkansas River headwaters, such as the population swimming in Ptarmigan Lake in the Saguache Mountain Range west of Buena Vista. Alpine lakes are popular destinations for backcountry hikers as well as anglers. Vegetation along mountain trails can range from sweet and delectable wild raspberries to the beautiful but potentially deadly forest mushrooms. While any size native trout dancing on the end of a fly line is a trophy in itself, there are places where greenback cutthroats may grow old and large.
Tucked away in the lofty peaks of the Continental Divide south of Georgetown, the deep blue waters of Square Tops Lakes are capable of growing some very impressive specimens of greenback trout. Although it takes burning a bit of boot leather to get here, these trout still see plenty of anglers. And they did not grow old and large by being dumb. It can take a lot of patience and savvy fly fishing skills to fool these wise old warriors. The right gear for fishing alpine lakes is a 3 or 4 weight, multi-piece pack rod and a floating fly line. Leaders should be 11 to 15 feet long and tapered to a 6/8 tippet. Long, light leaders are necessary to avoid lining the fish. Lining occurs when the fly line hitting the surface alarms the trout. Your fly boxes should contain a variety of both dry and wet flies. For dry flies, include the following patterns in sizes 14 to 20. A standard Adams, a mosquito, a Griffith's gnat, an elk hair caddis, a transparent, and a winged ant. And wet flies such as a flashback pheasant tail, a buckskin, a brown hackle peacock, an RS2, and a rainbow warrior midge. One of the most entertaining things about fishing alpine lakes is watching trout swim by in the clear water. Most lakes have a shallow rim around the shore where the bottom is visible and vegetation grows. This is known as the littoral zone. These are the most fertile areas in alpine lakes, and trout cruise here in search of food. The basic technique for fishing either a dry fly or a nymph is to cast the fly ahead of the fish and let the fly sit until the fish takes it or it passes it by. If trout continually reject the fly, it is time to try another technique. Cast a weighted nymph and let it sink to the bottom. As the fish approaches, lift the rod or pull the line so that the nymph rises from the bottom. When caught, these trout should be handled like rare treasures, admired,
He's every bit of 20.
and then returned safely back to their rightful place.
Other alpine lakes with recreational populations of greenback cutthroats include Silver Dollar Lakes, Lakes of the Clouds, and Hardestine Lake. While the high, lonesome reaches of alpine lakes may be prime July destinations for some anglers, others may find all they need in a more urban environment. The town of Steamboat Springs is among many Colorado towns that welcome fly fishers. A man in waders heading for the nearby Yampa River hardly raises an eyebrow on the busy streets of downtown.
Summer caddis hatches are the main event on the Yampa in July. Anglers can count on the hatches to bring at least a few of the river's wary brown trout to the surface. A good selection of dry flies and nymphs for imitating summer caddis might include an elk-hair caddis, a black foam caddis, an egg-laying caddis, a copper john, a bread crust, or a beadhead pheasant-tail. During peak times, adult caddis swarm in great numbers on streamside vegetation. Active trout might be holding beneath the vegetation in anticipation of snatching a meal.
In July, summer caddis are hatching in rivers and streams all over Colorado, including the scenic Blue River. A few miles down the river from Silverthorne and over the dam at Green Mountain Reservoir, the Blue River is a focal point of recreational activity.
Morning.
The fly patterns are the same here as for the Yampa, but getting down to the river is a little more tricky.
Things you do for fishing.
Prior to making the first cast, experienced anglers always take a few moments for reading the water. The technique for nymph fishing pocket waters and deep runs at close range is known as high sticking or short line nymphing. Dead drifting a nymph naturally in tricky currents requires expert line control. Only the first few feet of fly line are allowed to touch the water. Well-oxygenated rivers such as the Blue also support vibrant populations of golden stoneflies. In the Blue River above the reservoir, the technique changes from high sticking to a form of long-distance nymphing. The flies are cast upstream or across, and the line is mended to keep the flies drifting naturally.
Wow, look at all the caddis. Spunky. Sorry. Way to go. Oh, what a pretty fish.
Summer caddis hatches are widespread and prolific. While you can find excellent fishing in just about any mountain stream, here are a few suggestions to get you started. The Laramie River, Cochetope Creek, the Piedra River, the Conejos River, and the Lake Fork of the Gunnison.
The long, warm days of August beckon fly fishers to strap on a pair of hiking boots, grab a fly rod, and venture off the beaten path. Colorado's mountain ranges are laced with hundreds of miles of backcountry streams. Seductive wild trout waters tucked away in deep canyons, remote valleys, and subalpine forests. Places where fly fishers may find harmony balanced somewhere between the delicate presentation of a dry fly and the spirited fight of a wild fish. August also sees a pair of celebrities making their debut on the summer hatch roster. The appearance of the red quill and the pale morning dun mayflies adds a touch of elegance to the sport of matching the hatch. However, when it comes to all-star hatches, none has a larger following than the green drake, the king of mayflies. In early August, the Frying Pan River is the setting for one of Colorado's most popular fly fishing events, the Green Drake Mayfly Hatch. Once the green drakes begin coming off, the daily hatches will continue throughout most of August. Expert fly fisher and guide Kirk Webb takes you inside the finer points of dissecting the hatch.
We're looking at a lot of different types of insects here. The most prevalent, the one that really stands out the most, are these large green drake nymphs that we have. You can see just how robust and big in size these critters are. And it's really a very big sizable insect. It's actually one of the largest mayfly species that we have here in the state, which is why it draws so much attention. Obviously, we all like to fish big flies that we can see.
To match the hatching insects, anglers will need an assortment of size 12 dry flies, including a green drake dry fly, an olive comparadun, a parachute Adams, and size 12 to 14 nymphs such as a brown hackle peacock and a beadhead pheasant tail.
The nymphs almost always live in this very, very fast, highly oxygenated water. There's a fish right there. Came up on it. Now, one of the best ways to fish these green drakes in this hatch up here is to fish a dry dropper setup. And this is where the magic happens up here. There's one on the dry fly. Well, actually on the dropper. There we go. You know, this is kind of your average sized fish that we have up here in the valley, you know, kind of a nice smaller sized brown trout. You know, it's a good sign that we have a good healthy population of fish up here. There's one on the dry fly, taking us out in the faster water. But it's a great opportunity for those who don't fish a lot to also get into numbers of fish. And for the more avid angler, there's also some bigger fish like what we have here, kind of ripping me downstream here.
Other rivers with important green drake mayfly hatches are the Roaring Fork, the Taylor, and the Rio Grande.
A few miles north of Pagosa Springs, the winding road meets the Piedra River. From here, a hiking trail follows the river deep into the San Juan National Forest. 10 miles of the upper Piedra River are accessible only by foot, horse, or kayak. The remoteness of the location and the enchanted nature of the Piedra River embodies the feel of the Southwest. Most anglers that set out on the trail do not travel far enough. Their intentions may be noble at the onset, but in order to reach the choice waters, they must first pass by a string of tantalizing pools clustered below the trail. 2 miles past the pools, the river enters a wide, sunny valley. Here the Piedra transforms into a classic mountain stream, meandering through the grassy meadow in a series of riffles, runs, and pools. Bulky waders are left behind in favor of shorts and sandals.
In the backcountry, come prepared with a variety of dry flies, wet flies, and streamers. A well-stocked dry fly box should contain an assortment of caddis, mayfly, stonefly, and terrestrial imitations such as an elk-hair caddis, a parachute Adams, red quills, stimulators, a Madam X, and transparents. For wet flies, take these proven patterns: a flashback gold-ribbed hare's ear, a beadhead pheasant tail, a beadhead sparkle pupa, a beadhead prince nymph, a copper john, a San Juan worm, and woolly buggers. Even when summer showers discolor the water, the Piedra still remains fishable. Hooking and playing wild trout is one thing, holding on to them is another.
Nice rainbow.
Colorado's expansive subalpine forests are filled with backcountry trout streams. High in the Holy Cross wilderness, wild brook trout and cutthroat trout coexist in the crystalline waters of a remote, unnamed creek. Dry fly fishing doesn't get much better than watching a cutthroat trout taking a hopper pattern on the surface.
Colorado's backcountry streams are too numerous to list. And besides, the best locations are the ones that you discover on your own.
August is prime time for hatch chasers to head over to the Lake Fork of the Gunnison River. The Lake Fork is a free-flowing river, no dams here, just miles of dashing water, vibrant trout, and wonderful summertime hatches for fly fishers to fuss over. In addition to the usual array of summer caddis, the Lake Fork of the Gunnison offers the dry fly aficionado a fine selection of red quill and pale morning dun mayfly hatches.
Dry flies that match both the quills and duns might include these patterns in sizes 16 and 18. a parachute Adams, a parachute pale morning dun, and a red quill. Wet flies for imitating nymphs and emergers are size 16 to 18 beadhead pheasant tail, copper johns, top secret midges, and flashback pheasant tails. Red quills and PMDs are fair weather insects, popping out on sunny days in late morning and the early afternoon. Dry fly tactics are part visual, studying the rhythm of a rising fish and timing your fly to arrive at the exact time that the fish is looking up, and part logic, reading the water, studying the currents, knowing precisely where unseen trout are holding. A dry dropper rig covers both the visual and the logical parts of dissecting a difficult hatch. The dry fly drifting on the surface is there to entice strikes, but it also serves as a strike indicator for the nymph drifting below.
Other streams with tantalizing hatches of red quills and pale morning duns include the South Platte River, the Eagle River, and the Conejos River.
Autumn is a fine time to be a fly fisher in Colorado. It all comes together in September. The summer crowds are gone, the rivers and lakes are in prime condition, the weather is fair, and the scenery doesn't get much better. Kokanee salmon are running in the Gunnison and the South Platte rivers. It's a time to marvel in the beauty of exotic Arctic grayling and colorful spawning brook trout. And September is the perfect time to schedule a trip into the Gunnison Gorge for some serious late summer action. When the Gunnison River emerges from the Black Canyon, it flows through Gunnison Gorge, where the canyon walls tilt back and the sun pours in. There are 3 ways to access the gold medal waters of the gorge. You can drift in through the Black Canyon above, hike in from below, or hitch a ride on a jet boat at Pleasure Park.
Weighted streamers and hopper patterns are the flies du jour for a September day on the Gunnison. Streamers such as autumn splendors and woolly buggers, and large foam hoppers like a Chernobyl ant, a BLT, and a club sandwich. Banging the banks with heavy streamers will always trigger a few brown trout on the Gunnison. The angler picks his targets ahead of the boat. The streamer is slapped down within inches of the bank and dragged away quickly. Strikes come as quick reactions from brown trout holding near the bank. Some stretches are just too enticing to pass by quickly. When trout are holding in deeper water, the only way to move them is by dead drifting a pair of weighted nymphs beneath the strike indicator. Gunnison Gorge also has a nice hatch of trichos, tiny black and white mayflies that are often confused with midges. The Gunnison Gorge is teeming with grasshoppers in September, and large trout keep an eye on the surface for an easy meal.
Arctic grayling are especially popular with fly fishers because of their elegant appearance and their willingness to rise to a dry fly.
Flies for grayling should be small, sizes 16 to 20. Dry flies might include a parachute Adams, a Griffith's gnat, or an elk hair caddis, or nymphs like a gold-ribbed hare's ear, a scud, or a copper john. The grayling's cell-like dorsal fin makes it easy to distinguish from trout. Grayling tend to congregate near the inlets of reservoirs in fall, where they watch the current for drifting nymphs and brook trout eggs.
Other reservoirs to find Arctic grayling include Big Creek Lakes and Croshow Reservoir.
September and brook trout go together like a good hatch and a hand-tied fly. Brook trout are not natives, but they have adopted Colorado as their western home. Introduced in the 1800s, they thrive today in wild, self-sustaining populations found throughout the mountains. Brook trout spawn in the fall, the males come courting in their finest colors. The brookie is a painter's palette of bright spots and bold colors.
Brook trout fishing is a delightful sport that is best played with light rods, fine leaders, and dry flies. Brookies will take a variety of small flies such as a royal wolf or an Adams, and terrestrials like a Madam X and a transparent. Finding brook trout is easy. Most backcountry streams are loaded with them. Brook trout are particularly fond of small, quick streams strung with beaver ponds. Small brook trout choose the best lies according to safety and the availability of food. For anglers that like to keep a few trout, brook trout come with a bonus. In addition to the statewide limit of 4 trout, anglers may keep an additional 10 brookies if they are under 8 inches long. Backcountry anglers have long praised the culinary values of fresh-caught brook trout cooked over a crackling campfire. Beaver ponds are a brook trout's ideal habitat. Beaver pond brookies grow larger, but they also grow more wary. Anglers soon learn to take it slow and easy when approaching a beaver pond.
In September, fly fishing pilgrims from around the Rockies congregate on the banks of the South Platte and Gunnison rivers for the autumn ritual of playing and releasing kokanee salmon. The Gunnison River has long been the favorite destination, but the South Platte River above 11 Mile Reservoir is gaining ground in both numbers of fish and in size.
Scientists tell us that kokanee do not eat during the spawning run, but for whatever reason, they will take flies such as a rainbow warrior midge, a nuclear egg, a flash-tail hot egg, and a San Juan worm. Pilgrims in both locations may hook and play the salmon, but that's where the fun must end. Although valued highly for their food value, all kokanee must be returned to the water immediately. Releasing the fish seems an odd thing to do at first. After all, the salmon are on a one-way trip. Just like sockeye salmon, their saltwater cousins, kokanee die after spawning. So what is the harm in taking a few for the table? The harm is in diminishing returns. Every salmon is needed to complete its mission of supplying eggs and milk for future generations. Kokanee fishing at the Confluence in downtown Almont has evolved into a friendly social event. Anglers waiting their turn on the sidelines cheer the players as they tussle with hardy salmon.
In October, fly fishing opportunities lead anglers in many directions. Some look to the mountain reservoirs for the last hurrah before winter sets in. October is one of the best months of the year for finding large trout feeding from dawn till dusk. Other anglers may set their sights on rivers for the great fall spawning runs of the mountain whitefish and brown trout. Although brown trout are successful at reproducing naturally across most of their range, there are some populations that need a boost every now and then. The fingerlings that the divisional wildlife biologists use for stocking all come from special brown trout at one very special reservoir. Every fall, divisional wildlife biologists set up a temporary spawning operation on the shores of North Delaney Butte Reservoir. North Delaney is gold medal trout water, managed primarily for trophy-sized brown trout. It's Colorado's brown trout factory. The biologists set out live catch traps around the shoreline. The numbers and size of the brown trout captured in the traps is an impressive sight to see. gravid females and prime males are transported to the spawning tent where the eggs are fertilized with milk from the males. The fish are returned to the water unharmed, and the eggs are transported to a hatchery where they will develop into fingerlings.
Fly fishers also may get in on the action. Proven fly patterns include woolly buggers, zonkers, autumn splendors, scuds, and flash-tail hot eggs. Anglers also will find brown spawning in many streams around the state. Care should be taken to avoid wading through the reds where the trout are spawning naturally. Deep runs below the spawning areas can provide good fishing for trout that are feeding on eggs drifting in the current and feeding on smaller fish.
Other rivers with brown trout spawning runs include the White River, the Animas River, the Lake Fork of the Gunnison, the Middle Fork of the South Platte, and the Eagle River.
Mountain whitefish are an enigma among fly fishers. There are those who bemoan them as rough fish that are inferior to trout, and there are those who applaud them for their powerful fighting ability and their voracious appetite. Whitefish are indigenous to the Yampa and the White River drainages, swimming side by side with native cutthroat trout since the last ice age. There's no finer place than the White River for an October rendezvous with spawning whitefish.
Whitefish almost always feed on or near the bottom, but they are known to occasionally take a dry fly. Proven fly patterns for whitefish include the following nymphs in sizes 14 to 18. A beadhead pheasant tail, a mercury brassy, a beadhead prince nymph, a copper john, a San Juan worm, and a nuclear egg. Spawning mountain whitefish congregate in great numbers in pools below gravel bars and riffles. Whitefish are one of our most important native game fish because of their abundance and their willingness to take an artificial fly. The piggish whitefish feed actively at all times. They can save the day when trout fishing is slow.
mountain whitefish have found their way into the Colorado River, the Poudre River, and the Roaring Fork River.
October signals that open water fishing at Stillwater reservoirs is drawing to a close. But this is not the time to turn your back on a great opportunity to catch a large trout. As the water cools, trout leave the depths to forage heavily in the weedy underwater pastures near shore. Many anglers return to Spinney Mountain Reservoir to get a last shot at landing a trophy before the reservoir closes for the winter.
By late October, the Stillwater hatches are over and trout turn to other organisms such as crustaceans and smaller fish. Effective fly patterns include nymphs and streamers such as an olive scud, a woolly bugger, a zonker, and crayfish. A good technique for fishing these high mountain lakes on windy days like this is to get on the windy side of the lake and fish a scud. Scuds are crustaceans that live in the substrate, and they live in shallow water, and they like low light conditions. So when it's really windy or cloudy and there's not much light hitting the bottom of the lake, that's when scuds get active, and they are a staple in the trout's diet. They're here year-round, so trout really key in on these. This scud is weighted. It's got lead wire wrapped around the hook when I'm tying these. Now when scuds swim, they swim in darting motions. They just short darts, dart, 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 and then they'll pause, and when they pause they'll slowly sink, and then they'll dart, dart, dart again. So the technique is to cast the fly out there, count it down so that it's just right over the weed tops, and then start the stripping motion, and it's something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a pause. Real short strips, like 2 inches, 2, 3, 4, 5. And a lot of times the trout will pick it up as it's sinking, and you'll start stripping, and all of a sudden the fish will just be there.
Trout that have grown heavy and strong during the summer can put a deep bend in anglers' rods at these waters: Antero Reservoir, the Delaney Butte Reservoirs, and Lake John.
In November, after the glowing pastels of autumn have faded to the grays and browns of winter, ice invades the high country, closing the page on fishing at free-flowing streams. Nevertheless, fly fishing in Colorado does not end here. Instead, it's a beginning of sorts. Winter is when the undaunted simply add an extra layer of clothing beneath their waders and focus their attention on the tailwaters. Colorado's tailwater trout fisheries are among the most famous rivers in the West. The South Platte River alone is home to 3 world-class catch-and-release trout fisheries. There's the scenic Cheeseman Canyon, which just might be the best-known tailwater fishery in the world, 11 Mile Canyon, with more trout per mile than most rivers, and the Dream Stream, a mile-long stretch of meandering river below Spinney Mountain Reservoir. The South Platte River below Cheeseman Reservoir flows through rugged Cheeseman Canyon. Access to the Blue Ribbon waters is by foot only, via the Gill Trail, which follows the river upstream for 3 miles. In addition to providing excellent fly fishing for rainbow and brown trout, the Venerable Canyon and its selective trout have played the role of technical instructors to a generation of fly fishers. Trout in tailwaters can be very fussy about what they eat. They are accustomed to feeding on tiny aquatic organisms such as midges and small blue-winged olive mayflies, and fly patterns must match the originals in both appearance and action. It has been said about Cheeseman Canyon, if you can catch trout here, you can catch trout anywhere.
Winter is the time of the midge, and flies for imitating the various stages in the life of a midge consist of color variations of basic nymph, emerger, and dry fly patterns, all in sizes 18 to 24. These proven nymph patterns are effective in all tailwaters. The disco midge, the Mercury Black Beauty, the Mercury Brassy, the Zebra Midge, the San Juan Worm, and the Mysis Shrimp. Emergers for all tailwaters include the RS2, the Top Secret Midge, and the Rainbow Warrior Midge. Dry flies for midges are the Griffith's Gnat, the Parachute Adams, and a Mosquito. Fishing tactics also are the same at all tailwaters. Trout in tailwaters challenge the angler's ability to make flawless presentations with tiny flies. It is this highly technical approach to fishing that many anglers find extremely gratifying. Anglers work as close as possible to runs or pools where fish are holding. The flies are dead drifted using the high sticking and short line nymphing techniques. In addition to precision, patience and perseverance also play crucial roles in fooling discriminating trout.
On the western slope, anglers look to the Frying Pan River below Rudeye Reservoir to test their skills against large selective trout. Although fishing can be good farther downstream, most anglers concentrate their efforts in the first quarter mile below the dam. On some days, anglers can be seen waiting their turns at one of the 2 casting positions at the concrete discharge chute known as the toilet bowl. Trout hold in the deep bowl, waiting to gorge themselves on Mysis shrimp washed in from the reservoir above. In recent years, more and more fly fishers are discovering a tailwater fishery that courses through the city of Pueblo. The Arkansas River below Pueblo Reservoir shows the haggard face of a stream that has endured 100 years of life in the city. From the reservoir downstream to Interstate 25, the banks are scarred with remnants of old urban development, and the river is littered with discards of civilization. Now, the ravages of time are being erased. 9 miles of the river are undergoing a facelift that will both beautify the area and set the course for establishing a first-rate tailwater fishery.
Tailwaters where anglers may fine-tune their technical nymphing skills during the winter include the Taylor River below Taylor Park Reservoir, the Blue River below Lake Dillon, the South Platte below Spinney Mountain Reservoir, and the South Platte in 11 Mile Canyon.